Hi everyone. 9.5 years ago, something happened. Something pretty big, something that the world is sort of waking up to right now, and something that a lot of people seemingly don't really understand. It's the invention of Bitcoin. Over the past 9.5 years, we've seen thousands of alternative cryptocurrencies being developed, hundreds of articles by Nobel laureate economists and big bankers and financial experts claiming that Bitcoin's dead, or that another cryptocurrency is going to replace it, or that it's blockchain, not Bitcoin. But despite all of that, what we've seen in the last 9.5 years is that Bitcoin has continued to grow despite all of the challenges. So today, what I'd like to talk about is why Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin the crypto asset that continues to be the leader of the pack, continues to grow, and why I think everyone here should be aware of it and should own some. My name's Phil, and I'm addicted to Bitcoin. I got into it in 2014 at a talk a lot like this one in Madison. I moved to Madison originally in 2010 to be a project manager for Epic, which I was for about 7 years. So what I'd like to say is that I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to explain large, really technical software that nobody wants to use to people who have to use it. So that's my background. I also studied economics in college, and I'm not a programmer. I'm not a Nobel Prize-winning economist. I'm just a guy who really likes Bitcoin and who I'd like to think understands it from a deeper level. So first of all, I'd like to talk for about 30 to 45 minutes and then have a lot of time for discussion afterwards. So please, if you have questions, write them down. We'll have plenty of time to discuss. And another thing is, don't trust me. Anything I say up here. Don't trust anything that I say. Question everything, write down your questions, we'll discuss them afterwards, and we'll see if we can kind of, as a consensus, get to why Bitcoin matters and why we should be focusing on it. Okay, so I'd like to start off today with a little thought experiment. I'm going to give you, hypothetically, one of these three things in 5 years. So in the year 2023. So think about this. Think about the past 10 years, what you've seen. Think about maybe the next 5 years, what we might see. And then I'm going to have you all raise your hand, depending on which one you like. So who in the year 2023 would prefer to have $1,300 US? And be honest. Nobody. Oh, one, two. Okay, good. Who would prefer to take the ounce of gold in 5 years? A couple people. Nice. Oh, 4 people. Okay. And who would prefer to take the 17 million Satoshis? Okay. Seems like a lot of you probably own Bitcoin. How many of you here own Bitcoin already? Okay, so it looks like most of the people who own it already would take the Bitcoin. That's okay. But I'd like you guys to keep this in the back of your minds. In 5 years, a majority of us would pick the Satoshis over cash, gold, and Bitcoin. So let's start our conversation today by talking about something that we're all pretty familiar with, money. Here is the definition of money from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Something generally accepted as having 3 properties: a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. On the right-hand side, we have a can of mackerel. A can of mackerel doesn't really fit any of those 3 things, except it was used as currency in California in a jail. So what we found throughout history is that it's really difficult to put a definition on money, and you can't really ever enforce that definition because economies kind of find a way. So at the jail in California, Macs are their currency of choice. You can't use that currency outside of the jail, but that's what they use. Okay, with that definition as our background, I'm going to do a little bit of history and a little bit of econ. So come on back with me about 15,000 years. There was a major invention, and it's that we were able to exchange 2 items to a party that we didn't trust to make ourselves better off. So we were hunter-gatherers at this point, 15,000 years ago. And we started to specialize. We started to figure out that if I spend time maybe planting wheat, I can make myself better off as long as I can exchange my wheat for something else that I need. This is barter, and this was the primary form of exchange for about 15,000 years. So this is most of human history. We just bartered goods back and forth. But there's a huge problem with barter, and we call it the lack of double coincidence of wants, which is a title that only an economist could think of. Basically, if Sumerian farmer A wants to trade his cows for apples, he or she must find someone else to trade apples for cows. If the apple farmer doesn't want cows, no trade happens. So this was a big problem, especially as societies were starting to form. So once we transitioned into farming and agriculture, we had this big problem of a lack of coincidence of wants. So how do we solve that problem? Centralization. So the earliest form of writing that we've ever seen, that we've ever discovered, were ledgers. And they were ledgers kept by temples in Mesopotamia, saying, today, a cow is worth X number of apples, so on and so forth. So this was the way that we grew and built our societies through using a bank or a temple. And they were able to keep track of everything. But there's a big problem with that, and it's that the temples take a pretty big cut. So it's not super efficient. So what was a solution that we found to that as humans? Our first innovation in currency, which is exchanging non-edible, scarce items in exchange for a good and service. And we saw this in 1200 BC. So this has been around for over 3,000 years, is using a token to exchange, to store value over time and be able to exchange with. Unfortunately, transitioning from barter to a token introduces a slew of other problems that we've been battling with as civilization ever since, really, and to this day. And the problem is called the stock-to-flow ratio of tokens. So for example, if we're using shells as our currency, if shells become really valuable, it kind of puts a bounty on shells to go out and get more, because then you're wealthy, right? But the problem with shells also is that they're really not scarce. So what we saw throughout time is that currencies that have a higher stock-to-flow ratio end up taking over for currencies that are softer or lower stock-to-flow ratio. So here's an example of what I mean. Here's gold, silver, crude oil, copper, corn, and wheat. So gold has a really, really high stock-to-flow ratio. What that means, and this number on the left side, is that at the current supply of gold, it will take 65 years of mining gold to double it from today. Silver is also relatively high for a stock-to-flow ratio. It'll take about 20 years to double the supply. But silver also has some additional properties that are used in like in technology and for building things. So, hard money versus soft money, circling back. Money with a higher stock-to-flow ratio has always historically won out over a currency that's easier to inflate. And this hasn't really been optional. It's always been the case throughout history that the harder currency provides people with a better store of value, a way to focus on building and developing technology, and instead of focusing on currency and creating more of the currency. So gold has been a pretty good money throughout history, and it's the thing that we kind of converged on as humans. And here's some examples of how using a harder currency has always overtaken a softer currency. So shells were overtaken by gold. Rye stones are a really good example. There's a small island in Micronesia called Fiat, and their currency were these gigantic stones called rye stones. And they lasted a long time. It was a really great currency for this island, but then Western explorers showed up, and they had gold, and they had technology that was able to produce these rye stones very cheaply. And so what did they do? They flooded the market with rye stones and extracted the wealth from Micronesia. Surprisingly, or funny enough as well, the the tribe leaders in Micronesia at the time banned gold. They said, no, nobody can use gold. We're using our rye stones, and only the rye stones that we produce here in Micronesia. So even though they had proclaimed that this other currency was not valuable, they really didn't have a choice. The people who accepted gold or accepted the stones kind of circled around that authority figure. Agri beads, it's another really, really good example. These are also known as slave beads. So in Africa, a lot of the tribes were using these beautiful beads as their currency. Once again, the Westerners with their advanced technology and the ability to use gold as their currency came in, saw that there was an opportunity to produce these beads, and they extracted the wealth from the Africans. And in this case, ended up kind of enslaving them, which isn't great. And finally today, we're seeing it currently, the Venezuelan bolivar. It's a very, very soft currency. They're going through hyperinflation today in Venezuela, and the people are storing their wealth in literally anything that they can get that holds value more. And how do we see a currency overtaking another currency? There's this economic theory called Gresham's law, which is that bad money drives out the good money from an economy. So in Venezuela, what you see is as soon as somebody gets bolivars, they try to get rid of them as soon as possible because they're inflating. And they're hoarding things that allow them to store value over time so they don't have to just focus on having enough resources to buy food. So this is how we've seen this play out historically throughout thousands of years. And we kind of all converged on gold. But there's a big problem with gold. It's hard to move around. So how do we solve this problem? Through centralization. Remember our Sumerian farmer exchanging their cows and apples to the temple? Now we have banks who will accept gold, protect it for you, and in exchange, offer you these IOUs. And this was really, really great. What we're seeing here, actually, the earliest form of paper currency that I could find, and it's from China around, I believe, 600 AD. Marco Polo came to China and wrote a bunch of essays about how these crazy Chinese people were using paper as currency, but then brought it back to Europe because it's much easier to move around, and it's backed by gold. So you just exchange it for gold whenever you need to. But there's a big problem with that centralization, and it's that once you put all the gold, all the hard currency in a single spot, and you're being issued paper currency, it makes it a little bit easier to cheat. And we know that now as fractional reserve banking. The first example of fractional reserve banking is the Bank of Amsterdam in the early 1600s. Amsterdam was growing to be a global economic hub. There was a lot of currencies flowing in and out. So they were accepting all these different currencies, and they were issuing their own using fractional reserve lending. The problem with this, though, is that when you cheat a little bit, at some point you might get called out on that. And we've seen this throughout history as well, and including the Bank of Amsterdam, you have bank runs, where if you lose trust, or if the trust is lost, then everyone wants to take their money out, and if you don't have all of the money, it causes it to collapse. So over time, so from the 1600s on, we saw power kind of centralizing. We saw the formations of central banks around the world. And we were able to finance a lot of good, a lot of bad things. There's arguments that the world wars may not have been able to be financed without like an inflationary currency or without lending like this. And all of this culminated with the US becoming the global reserve currency after World War II. The US currency was the last really hard currency because it was still somewhat pegged to gold. And after the Second World War, all of Europe was pretty much economically devastated. So they needed a life raft, and they needed something to peg their currency to, and it was the US. As we grew, another big problem kind of popped up, where it's difficult to get enough gold for all the things you want to buy, so get rid of gold, people won't notice. So right now, we're living in the greatest economic experiment in human history, and that's courtesy of 1971, the Nixon shock, where the US dollar was finally officially depegged from gold. So now our currency is the softest form of currency humanity has ever really seen. All of the power is centralized to the central banks. They, at any point in time, can choose to inflate the currency. There's no maximum. It doesn't really cost them anything in the short term to produce currency, so they do. And ever since World War II, we've seen power consolidating further and further. We've seen really large economic collapses. And it really reintroduces this multiple thousand-year-old problem of the lack of coincidence of wants. So it requires our governments to meet internationally and put together these big trade agreements, because as a business or as an individual, it's really hard for me to do business with somebody from another country using a different currency, because I don't really want Venezuelan bolivars. Venezuelans probably want the US dollar at the moment, but in the long term, I don't think anybody really wants another country's currency. And in addition, we see power centralizing further. 2008 is a really, really good example of that. After the financial crisis, a bunch of banks who were too big to fail were bailed out and had to buy other banks and consolidate. So now in the US, we have a very, very small number of banks and individuals with an immense amount of power to impact the future of our currency. So there was a group of people and economists really who recognized that this was a problem. Back even before the 80s, Hayek is a very famous Austrian economist. He thought that there was no way that we could violently take this control out of the hands of government, because they had all of the hard currency, they had all the gold. So we had to be really sly and sneaky about it. So how do we fix this? With the internet by Kerry Cochran. No, so the internet completely decentralized information. It's changed how we interact with the world. We can communicate immediately with people from around the world. And until 2009, we still had to use this legacy financial system, but there was this group of people who recognized the internet's power to finally, once and for all, get rid of the problem of governments and authorities controlling a currency. And this was a group of people called the cypherpunks. They, over decades of research in cryptography and multiple different attempts at creating a solution to our problem of centralized currency, stumbled upon what I'm calling the fourth innovation of money, Bitcoin. I call it adamantium money because, calling back to earlier, stock to flow ratio and hardness of a currency, it's really, really important throughout history in who becomes the victor around the world. And Bitcoin is the hardest form of currency that the world has ever seen. How does it accomplish that? It has a fixed supply that is released slowly over time. So every 4 years, the amount of supply of the rate of supply of Bitcoin is cut in half. And as a result, the stock to flow ratio gets higher. So in 2025, Bitcoin will be harder than gold in order to double the supply. And in 2035, it gets to 400 and on until infinity, because it will never be inflated beyond 21 billion. Another really, really important feature of Bitcoin, it had an anonymous creator. It doesn't really matter who created Bitcoin. A lot of people have spent a lot of time and money and effort trying to figure out who created it. It's almost certainly some of the cypherpunks, one or a group of them. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, and it's a good thing that we don't know who the creator is, because they are not a central point of failure now. Another feature of Bitcoin is that its decentralization increases over time. So what we've seen in this is a graph of the last 2 years, the number of nodes, so people who run Bitcoin software at home, has been steadily increasing. We see 9,961 listening nodes, but there's an estimated over 100,000 nodes that have been that people are running. And what that means is that everybody who uses this system becomes their own Sumerian temple / central bank, even if you're running it on a piece of $40 computing, a Raspberry Pi. So every single person who uses it can verify that the Bitcoins have never been counterfeited and that the transactions are valid. And that number of central banks keeps increasing. So it's decentral banks. Additionally, we see the number of contributors, so people who are working directly on the Bitcoin software. This number of people has increased over time as well. And that's good because if somebody gets sick or injured, the system will continue running regardless. Other features that are incredibly important, and this is really what sets Bitcoin apart from any of the previously attempted cryptocurrencies, the increased demand doesn't increase the supply any faster. It instead increases the security of the network. This is called the difficulty adjustment, and this might be the thing that really locked in Bitcoin as the adamantium money. The harder you try to get Bitcoin, the harder Bitcoin becomes to kill, and you can't affect the inflation rate. Finally, and also importantly, Bitcoin is upgradable through consensus. So there's no central authority saying that are dictating the direction of Bitcoin. It requires everybody who's running a node or a central bank to choose which software to run. What we're seeing here is an entirely new network that's been developed on top of Bitcoin called the Lightning Network. A lot of the issues that you might hear from the news, from people who are running alternative cryptocurrencies is that Bitcoin's slow, it can't scale. I think that this is a very good example of Bitcoin scaling. And the number of people who are on the Lightning Network is increasing dramatically. So this is from, I think, a month ago. Now there's over, I think, 2,300 or 2,400 people who are becoming central banks of the Lightning Network. Additionally, in the last 9.5 years, it's been unkillable so far. And there have been a lot of people who have tried. In fact, just yesterday, the Bank of International Settlements, which is quite possibly the most centralized, most powerful bank in the world because they interact with all other central banks, released an article saying that Bitcoin could destroy the internet. It was a 24-page document, and most of the information is incorrect, but they're working hard to kill this thing. And what we're seeing, based on the fact that even today it's still running, is that what they say, what they mandate, doesn't really matter. Every 10 minutes, Bitcoin continues to add transactions to the block, and it continues to get stronger. We see this through many different ways, but in reality, the world is adopting Bitcoin, and this is, I think, the reason why I'm really talking today is we in America, we don't really think about money very often because the US dollar has been, for our entire lifetime and our parents' lifetime, the global reserve currency. So we have been the most powerful nation economically, not just as a result of that, but definitely benefited by that. So we're less than 5% of the world's population. So what really, really matters with Bitcoin and with really all cryptocurrencies is not what we're doing, but what everybody else is doing. And I think the last 9.5 years of increased adoption and increased merchant acceptance really shows that people are adopting this thing, and you can't stop it. In fact, I think this morning I read an article that there's a couple Russian banks that are now teaming up to start offering Bitcoin and other crypto assets. So the world is adopting this thing. I mean, we have Phoenix 74, which is a small bar in Vietnam. Here's a photo of Slovenia. You guys familiar with Slovenia? They're going into Bitcoin really hard. They're being very, very friendly to Bitcoin businesses. They've installed art in their cities. They've been, one of their cities they proclaimed the Bitcoin city. So I think Slovenia is a country to watch out for in the next decade. Additionally, we have Switzerland, At every single train station in Switzerland, you can buy Bitcoin. And that's Switzerland of Swiss bank account and Swiss banking. So they kind of know. I think they're a pretty good. You get a good pulse on where this thing's heading based on what the Swiss are doing. And finally, this is a graph of local Bitcoin trading in Venezuela. And like I mentioned earlier, Venezuela is currently undergoing massive hyperinflation. So their currency is being devalued very, very quickly. And despite that, what we see is an increase of Bitcoin trading. And this is the number of Bitcoins, not the price in Venezuelan bolivars. So when Bitcoin was really expensive in December, obviously they couldn't buy as much, but now we see it's increasing as the price of Bitcoin is crashing and Bitcoin's obviously dying. So, but we see in Venezuela kind of a different story. These people are trying to escape economic reality through using Bitcoin. So why do we cover this history with poorly drawn stick figures and a little bit of economic theory? Because I want people to know, I want Americans to know really that we're all participating in this experiment, and it's not really optional ultimately. And there's really a couple outcomes. There's two outcomes essentially, and I've broken out into how this impacts you. One, Bitcoin dies, this experiment goes bust. Wow, that was pretty crazy. Or two, Bitcoin succeeds, and it was originally founded and created to become the world's global cryptocurrency, so that's why it was created. So either Bitcoin succeeds and you're an early adopter, even today, most people in the world have not been born yet. Bitcoin succeeds and you're a late adopter. I don't really foresee that being pleasant. Or Bitcoin succeeds, but not until some other time. And your descendants, they probably won't care too much that we missed it. So that's my talk for now. Here's some additional resources. I strongly recommend reading the book called The Bitcoin Standard. A lot of my talk was based on that book. It's just a great introduction to history and economics. Andreas Antonopoulos is, I think, the best speaker in the space. And then Jimmy Song and Stop and Decrypt write a little bit more technical articles about why Bitcoin over blockchain, or pointing out some of the key features of alternative currencies and maybe some critical eye on those. So that's my talk. I'd like to just spend the rest of the time discussing and asking questions. Thank you for coming and listening to me rant.
So why Bitcoin instead of gold?
So the question was, why Bitcoin instead of gold? Gold has some pretty big problems that we've seen. Mostly that it's really hard to transport. And so as a result, we created banks. We deposited gold into banks. We got paper currency instead. That solved the problem of being easy to transport, but it made it super easy for banks to cheat a little bit or inflate the currency. So Bitcoin, owning Bitcoin and using Bitcoin is kind of a rejection of inflation. No longer does your wealth need to be inflated because there's a choice. And that choice can be very painful sometimes. When you see the price go to 20,000 and down to 6,000, it hurts. But pretty much anybody who has held Bitcoin for 2 years or longer is so far in the green that it doesn't matter that much for the hodlers. That's what they call it. Yeah. So I've been in it for 4 years, and I am an example of being economically advantaged for holding a harder currency over time.
If I could just jump in on one of the other pieces you didn't mention before, gold, the divisibility piece of it also, the verifiable piece, that's one of the other key advantages I've heard listed over gold of, yes, you can divide gold coins or bricks into it, but that usually takes very accurate scales and someone trusting those sort of things. Whereas with Bitcoin, the movement, the accounts, the ledgers, the transactions are all based on just pure math. So you're not trusting a set of scales. You're not trusting someone's grading of, is this really 99% gold piece of it. So the trust factor and the divisibility factor also go in Bitcoin's favor.
Additionally, the supply of gold is ultimately unknown. We don't know how much gold exists in the world. We don't know if technology will allow us to get gold from asteroids or something. But with Bitcoin, it's just software. It's written. It's hard. It's 21 million. It'll never change. Yeah, good question. Yes?
What makes someone want to buy a sandwich with Bitcoin today rather
Nothing.
than save it and buy a car 10 years from now?
Yes. So the question is, why would somebody want to spend Bitcoin today when it's such a good store of value long term? There's no reason. What we talked about earlier and what I was trying to allude to is this idea called Gresham's law, where if you have a strong currency or you have a weak currency, you want to get rid of your weak currency faster. So don't spend Bitcoin, spend your other currencies. They're weaker, they're softer.
But,
Yeah.
but couldn't you argue that that's helped driving up the value of the currency itself?
Spending it?
Yeah.
Sure. Yep. Merchant adoption is really helpful. At this point, I would say Bitcoin, you can spend it on essentially anything, and if you can't buy something directly with it, you can exchange it for another currency. So it's like, I don't know. It takes a couple extra steps, but I'm able to buy things off Amazon. I'm able to get lunch with it if I really want to, or at the end of the day, I can go to that ATM and convert it to US dollars. But what I'm doing right now is trying as hard as I can not to spend it. So saving it, thinking about the future, lowering my time preference, planning. Because despite the current price, my number of Bitcoin is always the same percentage of the entire Bitcoin network. Yeah.
Sure, and I could also put in for the things that you may still want to spend it on today. There's obviously the value is what's fluctuating rapidly right now. The other piece of Bitcoin for a transaction that a transaction done in Bitcoin gives is the immutable ledger.
Yeah.
That if there is a transaction that you need to prove at some point in the future that you did, if you really need to prove you bought that sandwich for whatever reason, if you're the 10 millionth customer at that coffee shop and you need to verify that one or whatever, that's one of the benefits of having that transaction be locked in there. There is still use cases where they would want to do that. Also things that may not be your daily cup of coffee, but any place where going across international borders, or if you're needing the provable verifiability of it, there can still be benefits for transacting in it today.
Yeah. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Is there something to be said for the fact that I can use gold for something useful, whereas Bitcoin, I don't know how to turn that into something that I would use in my daily life?
Yeah, I'm sure, I don't really have a good answer to that. Gold can be made into jewelries and stuff, and jewelry, and it looks nice as a statue or something.
Electronics.
Yeah, in electronics, right? Bitcoin doesn't have alternative use cases outside of global currency, which in some ways is it's focusing on that, right? That's its main purpose, and it won't be potentially disrupted by technological advancements.
Could I create a different Bitcoin then?
So lots of people have created different
Right.
Bitcoins, but what I would say is that every time somebody launches an altcoin, you're immediately starting off with a softer currency than Bitcoin, because you're a centralized point of failure usually, or your cryptocurrency has features that make the monetary policy easier to change. Not talking about specifics really, but I think I could go into some specifics.
I was just going to say to that point, the transition from gold to fiat currency and paper money was to create something that had no other use case other than just as money. So the fact that gold is money is actually not a benefit, but kind of a detriment. You got paper money so that it only had a purpose as exchanging in transactions.
Yeah.
So cryptocurrency, or Bitcoin in this case, actually serves that purpose better than gold would.
Yeah.
And I just want to add one more thing under that chain. What's interesting about, I'd say cryptocurrencies in general, but Bitcoin as well, is that you can lock Bitcoin into escrows and things like that.
Yeah.
So it has some smart elements to it as well. And there are, Ethereum, look at much of other smart contract platforms. They have ways, Bitcoin can do that too, but they have ways of saying, all right, well, we're going to make this type of equity or this type of an asset a smart asset. So it locks up between two parties until some set of criteria is fulfilled, like you're buying a house, it can do the lockup, it can do the titling and everything, and it flows through. Yeah. Gold definitely can't do that. Gold is like the rock, and it just sits there and goes on jewelry and sometimes sometimes help conductive flow for a very expensive electronic piece or something. But like the actual, like the nature of it being software and value and immutable is that you can put it in all these transaction pieces and have it become so much more, have it become the legal framework, have it become the medium of exchange. Sorry.
So no, it's fine. There's a lot of talk about like, now it's programmable and you can create all these smart contracts. In my experience, I haven't seen any implemented use cases that have been super exciting to me personally. But except for one, and that is the Lightning Network. So that is the new payment network for Bitcoin, and it is a smart contract. So in order to basically unlock your currency from the blockchain, you enter into a smart contract with another party, and then you're able to transmit value around this new network. So that's a prime example of a really, really robust and interesting smart contract use case on Bitcoin.
Are you familiar with Rootstock?
Yes. Yeah. So Rootstock is a company that's creating a pegged sidechain to Bitcoin, and their whole value proposition is that it's Ethereum-style smart contracts that can be run on their sidechain that are pegged to Bitcoin. So they didn't create another currency in order to, well, they created some tokens, but the tokens are pegged to Bitcoin. So it's essentially like using a, paper currency backed by gold. But they can run decentralized applications. Yeah.
So why is that better? Yeah, maybe I don't understand why.
Why is it better than what?
Than like the US dollar being pegged to gold or something like that?
Well, Rootstock isn't really trying to, at least my understanding is they're not trying to be like a payment platform. They're trying to create decentralized applications on Bitcoin. I don't know why that's better yet than Ethereum, other than that it's pegged to Bitcoin, which is the hardest currency that we've seen. So your value is being pegged to.
I guess just to go off of the why would it be better than the paper money, the problem was advertised of when the Sumerian temple switched to paper currency, it's easier to cheat because we as the general users of the currency, it's hard to audit. So yeah, it's using a paper money in this modern day and age. If you wanted to audit the U.S. Federal Reserve, you'd have to go there and get clearance and whatever, and not everyone can do that. Whereas Rootstock's sidechain, again, it's just based on math. There is a programmable way that you can tell your computer to verify it for you. Everyone can verify that they haven't cheated, they haven't fudged it.
Although that said, currently Rootstock does require minimal amounts of trust, so they need some upgrades to Bitcoin in order to be totally trustless. So we'll see.
More trusted.
Yeah, more trusted, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know how to say this. A leaping off point. The story about history where the Westerners come with the gold and technology and they extract the wealth.
Yeah.
Will Bitcoiners be the new Westerners with our technology extracting wealth from the world?
So if the last 10 years are any indication, yes.
And then what will happen if the fixed supply, because you say it happens slowly, except for when the computing power is upped?
Yeah.
Because they're coming out with quantum computers, they're using that. So the hash rate's going to go faster. Mm-hmm. What will happen when the 21 million is hit and we have all of these soft currencies? Is Bitcoin just making a new marketplace? It's a new market of the internet? It's a new, because let's say Bitcoin is the national currency of the nation of the internet.
Yeah.
We're creating a whole new marketplace, and this is just all a lexicon of lingo and for everybody to get into the club and get on board, and this is how we're all going to be citizens of Bitcoin, or how would I don't know, what do you see?
So Bitcoin, and this took me a long time to kind of get to, is that Bitcoin just is. It doesn't matter what we think about it. Our opinions really don't matter. It's software, right? So we can impose our morals onto Bitcoin, but Bitcoin just, every 10 minutes there's a block added, and regardless of how much hash power is added to secure transactions, every 2016 blocks, it gets harder to make to issue new Bitcoin. What I'm seeing over time is that Bitcoin's base layer, so the blockchain itself, is transitioning from like a layer to use to make coffee transactions into more of a settlement layer. And the Lightning Network will be what is used to make daily transactions on it. And like I've already made a bunch of transactions with it. I bought some stickers. It's pretty cool. So yeah, I think it's the currency of the internet, or it's hard to say. It's like it is the internet kind of, and the world gets to use it if we choose to. Although
the utility of the internet, that like it's kind of like an imaginary land that's coming in, like it's a world within a world.
So I think, and this is maybe my most extreme idea, I think that it is like the biggest innovation that we've seen the internet be able to provide. Like it is basically the reason for the internet, I think, is that it frees money from any single authority, which I think is immensely disruptive.
So it's like money is, it's the holding money is like one component, and now because of Bitcoin, is it like that the paper money is now almost fixed, like corrected, altered, because now the digital currency sort of it brings more value to the paper money, and if they're just like printing, then it's almost being backed by Bitcoin.
So there's a lot of people who theorize that like if this thing continues to grow at the rate that it has, at some point the only way for governments to remain any sort of semblance of control is to peg their currency back either to gold or to Bitcoin. And even then, it's like, why would I use this currency that's pegged to Bitcoin if I could just use Bitcoin?
Right.
So yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. Yeah.
What would you say the likelihood of a particular group capturing consensus and completely altering the sort of math and logic behind Bitcoin and just ruining
the supply?
The supply.
Yeah, so like I said, it's impossible to inflate Bitcoin beyond 21 million, but there is a possibility. I think it's so unlikely that it's essentially impossible, and it's that they would have to get unanimous consensus from everybody who is a central bank of Bitcoin, so everyone running the software, to agree to inflate the supply, which, in my opinion, will never happen because it doesn't make economic sense for me to do that. What we saw actually in the last year is this new phenomenon of Bitcoin forks. And so it's people who are taking copies of the blockchain and Bitcoin software and launching their own new cryptocurrency. But for all intents and purposes, none of them have really taken off. Bitcoin Cash is the biggest, most popular one, and it's really struggled to maintain even like 10 to 15% of Bitcoin's value. That's actually one of my primary sources of income for the last year since I left Epic was selling off these Bitcoin forks, because I could exchange a very, very soft currency to my adamantium money, Bitcoin. So that's been really, really good for me. So keep forking it. I'm gonna take the Bitcoin away from you guys. Yeah.
I wanted to add on to the when you're talking about the currency of the internet, you want to look at Bitcoin similar to how the dollar was for the global economy for the last 40 to 50 years, where not only is it a means of exchange and store of value, but you're also exchanging other currencies, mainly, in this example, altcoins that can then prop up the economy as their own currencies. More as a baseline than even as a means of exchange, because the Lightning Network fixes a lot of the transaction costs, but where Bitcoin fails as a means of transaction, it holds up as a store of value between other currencies that you can exchange as means of value. So Ethereum you have backed by Bitcoin, and it can add on to that as a basis for the transaction in the first place.
So I think yes. I'm trying to formulate what your thought is. I guess that you can use altcoins because there is Bitcoin there.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So I think yes, anyone can choose to use altcoins. I think that it's I think that when you use an altcoin, you're saying the creation of money is a valuable concept. I choose not to believe that anymore. But there's lots of people who think that maybe there are some other use cases that Bitcoin, there's definitely a bunch of use cases that Bitcoin can't do right now. We'll just see if they are actually important or play out. So, yeah.
So what is the Lightning Network, and is that the solution to the scaling problem?
So the Lightning Network is one of many solutions to the scaling problem. So taking a step back, blockchains so far have been incredibly difficult to scale in a way that protects the hardness of the currency. So you can scale on-chain, which is on the blockchain itself, or off-chain, which is what the Lightning Network kind of does. There's been many upgrades to Bitcoin on-chain in the last year. There's been segregated witness, which allowed us to implement the Lightning Network. And that sort of compresses transactions a little bit further. There's been ways to use the blockchain a little bit more efficiently. We call that batching. So right now I can send all of you 25 cents worth of Bitcoin in one transaction. So using 30 payments in one transaction. That's been the biggest space saver, I think, out of anything so far. And then in the future, there's additional upgrades that are in the works. One of them is called Schnorr signatures, which further compresses on-chain transactions. But even so, you're never going to. It will be very difficult to scale to fit every possible human transaction onto this distributed database, because everybody has to be able to run it on their Raspberry Pi at home. They don't have to, but that's kind of the value proposition of Bitcoin. Decentralization increases over time, so we want to keep that. Lightning Network is a way around that because it unlocks your Bitcoin from the blockchain and allows you to use them without ever having to kind of send that transaction out to everybody who's running the software. This is a long answer. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Which I can say, on the Lightning Network, we have actually had, there's been a talk, actually, I gave that one on the Lightning Network for Madison Blockchain, which we have a recording of that one. So yeah, if you're more interested in that one, there's an hour-long presentation on that one, which we have the video recording of, that we can share on that one as well.
Yeah. Nice.
So you can see, sorry, just to add on that, our Slack group, we publish the URLs to the videos that we record. So feel free to join us on our Slack group. You can get to our Slack group via, on the Madison Blockchain homepage, we have the URL that allows you to join our Slack. Do you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah. So Bitcoin runs on a blockchain,
Yeah.
which is the technology used to secure it and do all the transactions and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's other types of public distributed databases
Yeah.
that are secured, like Tangles and stuff.
Yeah.
Are there any that are competing with the basis of Bitcoin, but still trying to implement the idea of Bitcoin?
Yes, so there's thousands of cryptocurrencies out there attempting to compete with Bitcoin, and what I think that they start off as softer currency, like because Bitcoin has already been invented and there's no central authority, and it's been proven kind of throughout time that it's really hard to mess with this thing. All of these altcoins kind of start off disadvantaged. That said, maybe one is invented and somehow manages to take over like Bitcoin's value proposition of decentralized store of value over time using a different technology. But I think there's a lot of computer science right now that's happening. It's really, really fascinating, but it's kind of it's like solving a problem that we don't really have anymore a lot of times, I think. But like I said, I'm not a programmer, so Nolan.
I guess I'm just curious, like, with all of the ICOs and like new cryptocurrencies that are created, a massive amount of wealth, it seems, is created through this process, but not value necessarily.
Yeah.
Like, probably a very small number of them actually go on to be of any value to anybody. But like, is that just this like temporary situation that we're in because everyone's excited about this and it's kind of a bubble and that will stop? Or will we just constantly be able to create a bunch of wealth in this meaningless way with soft currency and then convert it into...
Yeah, that's a great question. Like the ICOs are kind of today's like IPOs, like stock boom, right? But what I've seen is every time a new ICO is created, they always accept another cryptocurrency. They're always like, yeah, send us your Bitcoin or send us even Ethereum. So why are they doing that if they're creating something that's truly valuable? And then the other thing that I see is whenever money is printed, you're not creating wealth, you're redistributing wealth. So you're taking wealth from somebody else and centralizing it or, really just centralizing it. So like, when you see the launch of a cryptocurrency, it's this small group of developers usually extracting the wealth out of everybody who's participating. I think it's going to keep going until people recognize that they no longer have to deal with inflation I think the world will ultimately, just based on economics, converge on the thing that's the hardest. Yeah.
Okay, so like people. Have you ever run into somebody who got into Bitcoin or didn't get into Bitcoin in 2008?
Yeah.
How do they treat you when they hear you that you're in Bitcoin now?
Yeah.
And because for me, I've gotten like disgruntled. I think I got a 1-star rating on my my Lyft ride because I met somebody in San Francisco who's now driving Lyft, has to move nearer to mom and dad because they have a kid, and he almost got in 2008.
Yeah.
Like, he was super disgruntled.
Yeah.
Now that's just like a small thing, but
Yeah.
like if I were to extrapolate that across like the whole just
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
what will this do to people who, one, won't, I guess for another word, evolve?
Yeah.
Because this is like the smart money, just like how the BlackBerry sort of phased out a lot of people of like, I give up. I give up on the smartphones, I give up on all of this, I can't keep up.
Yeah.
Is this gonna be another like kind of scaffolding that separates people, like people to people
Yeah.
connection? Because now it's like, we're powered by Bitcoin. Oh, you're still on fiat money? Like, is this gonna create a new caste system?
Yeah, it's creating a new cash
Essentially.
system. Like, and what my whole argument really is like, it's only optional now. If it continues to grow, it will become an economic necessity.
So then could people, like, let's say that there are vulnerable populations. They're not gonna learn how or why Bitcoin
Vulnerable
works.
populations?
Yeah, like, I mean, people with disabilities or older generations, or maybe even like people who just have an aversion to technology.
Yeah.
Men, women, whatever. Can they have this stuff be used like towards their disadvantage? Like, you don't know how your money's being held, and like will there be technology that will come out to try and like equalize that? Like, I'm wondering just
so,
kind of like,
yeah, so,
how do you feel like the
like,
general
and-
feels of the world will be?
So I think your first point was like, there's a lot of people you've met who had heard about it early on, didn't get into it, and feel like they missed the boat. I got in 2014 when Bitcoin was like $375, and I was like, man, I missed the boat.
Right,
but this
everybody
thing, I'll try it. And I got in the week after it crashed to $180. And I was like, this thing is ridiculous. It doesn't work. But then I learned more about it, and I was patient. And 3.5 years later, like, unless you're day trading, you're not going to get value out of it. You're not going to get rich instantly. But what I'm saying is, like, long term, this thing is the best store of value we've ever seen. And it's not stopping. So the more people that get onto it, like, the more people will be required to get onto it.
One reason why I'm optimistic is, in the long run, if you think about it, one of the hardest assets is real estate.
Yeah.
Eventually, this wave has to buy real things if it's going to be valuable.
Yeah.
So the people who hold those assets and have things of real value will eventually be able to sell those for Bitcoin dividends, the actual currency.
In the book, the Bitcoin Standard, the author talks a lot about that. Like, we've had hard currencies before. In the 17, 18, 19, early 1900s, we were still on gold, and like, people still spent money on things. It's just that I think throughout time we've kind of our idea of what savings has been sort of transformed. So savings used to be like, you put money into the bank and like it'll grow over time. And now what we have is like our form of savings is mostly investing, right? So savings is not really a thing anymore. Like, none of you guys, well, 2 people I think wanted $1,300 after 5 years. It's not a good store of value long term. But now we have alternatives that are good stores of value that are not investing in the stock market or buying government bonds or something. So it's just another option. Yeah, there's going to be people left behind. The reason I'm doing talks like this is to hopefully help people to be alert of it, like, just know.
Adoption will be more seamless than you think, because, like, I mean, how much of your wealth is online already? Right?
Yeah.
Like, probably the majority, right? Your electronic bank account, your stock accounts, your Amazon account, whatever. Like, adopting Amazon and buying things online is probably a much steeper curve than if it's like, oh, it's not a dollar sign there, now it's a Bitcoin sign there. Like, yeah, you have to like make a transition in your mind, and like we're so early, like we're talking like TCP/IP stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh man, I don't know how the internet's going to affect me. I don't know about this whole email thing. I'd rather send the letter because I know it's going to get there. You know what I mean? But like nobody really thinks that way anymore. And now we're like, everything's on the internet anyway. So it's like I think switching the currency on the internet from a dollar sign to a Bitcoin sign might actually be a quicker phase out than you think. And you can I think the way that seeing the DApp adoption and currency adoptions and whatnot. I mean, Bitcoin will eventually just bolt into your website, so you can have your wallet right on your computer, and you can bind it with a DApp or whatever, and you can buy something on Amazon, or you can sell something on Amazon or whatever. And so you'll just have the same value you have online. You just don't really think about it. So I think the adoption curve will actually be very quick. And to your point about the disadvantage, I think it's actually flips the script a little bit. Right now the fiat system completely favors the advantage.
The wealthy, yeah. You see the.
I mean, it's it's already skewed so far out of whack that it's actually makes it easier to come from a disadvantaged point of view and be able to adopt it quicker, or not have to shuffle over a gazillion dollars of assets into Bitcoin and figure out how to do it.
Yeah, the people who have all the money are still busy saying that it's going to destroy the world and the internet and the environment, and the everyday person has the ability to get such a large portion of a potentially global currency right now that I think individuals are definitely at an advantage.
It seems
Let's
like
stop. You go.
it seems like disadvantaged people are already using it as a tool to empower themselves. Like in Venezuela, if their paycheck is valueless, they have at least something to provide to their family.
And I think also you see in places like Africa where banking is already atrocious. Nobody has bank accounts in Africa. But they are getting cell phones and smartphones, and they're kind of leapfrogging over this whole concept of banking. So there's a currency in Africa called M-Pesa that's used for I think a majority of the transactions in a bunch of different countries. And Bitcoin is like that. You can be a bank on your phone. You don't need a bank account anywhere.
So do you think that this will cause more person-to-person attacks then? Because people are going to start coming after the smartphones?
Possibly.
If it becomes truly scarce and you can't make more than 21 million, is it going to cause all of these crypto people who are supposedly kind of under the radar, people who want to have wealth but not appear so wealthy? I feel that's sort of kind of a culture in the crypto space. I mean, obviously
being vocal about it now is puts a person like me at risk, and people get hacked all the time.
Yeah.
But what I would say is the user experience is going to improve on wallets and stuff, and it's going to become less and less likely. You have to, taking responsibility for your finances is a lot of work, and it requires investment of time and money. But I think that the economic advantages outweigh the potential current risk. But yes, it is risky, and people will be hacked, lose money in the back end.
So right now, Bitcoin, I guess, is taking just a small portion of the global trade, right?
Yeah.
And the global value.
Super small portion. Yeah.
If that is continuing to grow and grow and grow, and invading in the turf of fiat currencies or government issued currencies, it's going to disrupt trade, taxation,
everything,
the inflation control that the governments have.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest challenges are for nations?
Yeah.
As such?
I mean, that's another really good question.
Global.
Yeah. So what I would say is I think right now the most governments and most banks around the world are sort of in the denial phase. So they're putting out these articles saying Bitcoin's dying. They're focusing more on alternative currencies Bitcoin was okay, but these are better. In the meantime, you have people like Putin investing in Bitcoin miners and mining Bitcoin. So they're saying one thing, they're doing another. And I think we're going to continue to see that. It'll probably get worse. So don't trust anything you read or hear. This is the first thing. And buy Bitcoin. Yeah, taxation is going to be really weird, and I don't know how exactly it's going to work. I know that the role of government is going to be, I think, severely reduced. Whether that's good or bad depends on how you feel about government. But I think, assuming this thing continues, it's kind of an inevitability. You're not going to be able to have perpetual war because nobody's going to give you their Bitcoin to go invade Yemen. Yeah.
Will Bitcoin become its own platform, political platform?
Bitcoin just is software. It is. So it's whatever we apply to.
There's a community of people.
Yeah.
So if there's a huge like the people, could it make like a global imaginary stage where like somebody just rises and rises and rises?
Yeah,
like
I mean,
Andreas
like
or something.
for somebody like me, I was, you know, somebody came up to me on the street and was like, "Will you sign a name on this petition and like for this, I don't know, governor or whatever?" And I asked them like, "Well, what are the thoughts on Bitcoin?" So like, I will specifically vote depending on what the candidate thinks about Bitcoin. But that's just me. I don't know. I'm weird.
Is there a Bitcoin lobby?
No, not really. There are powerful individuals who have Bitcoin who go to the government to lobby, but there isn't like it's decentralized. There's no authority. You can't say like Bitcoin is lobbying the government because it's just people who have it.
But I imagine that people who have a lot of wealth in Bitcoin eventually try to influence government.
Yes, oh certainly. Like I mean, you see people like Peter Thiel and Tim Draper right now who are very, very wealthy and hold a lot of Bitcoin. The Winklevoss twins have a ton of Bitcoins. They're trying to work with regulators to make it a friendlier environment in the U.S. But right now, I would say the U.S. is pretty disadvantaged. I lived in Europe for a couple of years, and I was in the Netherlands, and buying Bitcoin there was so easy. It took me, I don't know, 20 minutes, and here it's like 4 or 5 days, and you have to get your ID validated, and so I don't know. We're kind of setting ourselves up at a bit of a disadvantage, and I think it's because we're so used to having control of the money that we don't want to, that our government doesn't want to give it up. So that's, yeah.
I think to play off of that, it's worthwhile to mention that Bitcoin, when you talk about the West extracting wealth, the wealth that Bitcoin is extracting specifically is from centralized banks because the store of value is being put into Bitcoin. That's why the market cap of Bitcoin is, I'm actually not sure the current figure, but that's...
I think it's like 130 billion or something, right?
That's where the funds are coming from centralized banks because people are holding Bitcoin, they're not simply spending that money. So the banks are actually losing money as it grows more.
So there was a quote, and I don't know who it was right now, but it was Bitcoin is a black hole for global finance on the global balance sheet, I think, because as soon as money leaves other currencies into Bitcoin, like the overall wealth of that currency just drops, whereas Bitcoin increases. But governments are already doing a really, really good job of devaluing their currencies as is. So some currencies have already collapsed. Actually, 152 since I think in the past 100 years or something.
What would you say to the point? I think I've heard this before, that the role of a central bank is good in certain cases. In an up economy right now, sure, inflation is a bad thing, but in a down economy, we might actually want that inflation to kickstart things. Bitcoin doesn't necessarily offer that. That's
a great point. Like I kind of mentioned a few times in my talk, like inflation is now an individual choice. So if you feel that inflation is valuable, you can choose to store your wealth in an inflationary currency. But what we're seeing is that people are overwhelmingly choosing a currency that doesn't inflate. So right now it's a choice, but over time we'll see how much of a choice it really is anymore. Like it's going to be a very, very different global economy if this thing continues. Like I'm not able to see the future. So, but yeah, I don't know. So another argument that the author of the Bitcoin Standard makes is that this whole concept of boom and bust cycles in business is kind of a result of inflationary currencies. So this idea of deficit spending in a down economy, this author thinks that that's kind of bogus, that it's really difficult for a central authority to plan out economics, right? And peer-to-peer and just business-to-business is really, like the microeconomics is really where the value is, and the macroeconomics is kind of hocus-pocus. So. Cool. Yeah, Nico.
So I was looking at your LinkedIn and it says you're a Bitcoin guide.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like a fake job.
It is.
What sort of services does the guide provide, and is that something that we should be?
So I'm alternatively employed right now, so I moved back to Madison, and I'm starting to form a company and get more invested. But on the side, what I've been doing is providing altcoin or fork dumping services. So we talked about Bitcoin forks like Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Cash. There's about 30 of them. that I know how to claim and sell. So if you have your Bitcoin on a phone wallet or at home on a computer, I've been helping people to earn more Bitcoin that way. And like, just as myself as an example, I think I made in the last 9 months like 20% more Bitcoin just from selling these forks. So yeah, if that's a service that you guys are interested in, get in contact with me. Otherwise, I'm happy to just help everybody get set up, and there's an ATM in the back. We can go walk over, we'll download the app. I have a sticky note that you can write down recovery words on, and you can put 20 bucks in and just see it. So I'm incentivized to spread this thing to other people because I store a lot of value in it. So that's why you shouldn't trust me. Good question. Yeah.
Great. I just want to say thank you for the amazing questions and for your attendance tonight. And thank you, Phil, for giving this great presentation.
Thanks.
Would you be able to give a quick teaser of like what part 2 of Bitcoin, why Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to continue talking. I think maybe part 2 will be more focused on why Bitcoin versus an alternative cryptocurrency. But I haven't put together the presentation yet. I was hoping to kind of think about our conversation today and formulate something that's a follow-up.
Well, thank you. I just want to give a round of applause.